You are listening to the new man, beyond the macho jerk and the new age wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Are you bored with that whole left versus right culture war gridlock? What if there was a way that this dumpster fire could make us stronger or more evolved? And could you possibly find some common ground with your bigot uncle this holiday season? Today, Jeff Salzman from the Daily Evolver podcast stops by to discuss integral theory. Ken Wilber's integral theory has had a huge impact on my life, and today, Jeff and I are going to explore how it can help all of us navigate our conflicted world. How did you get into integral? What was your draw to all of that?
Well, actually, I was always a seeker. You know, I was always the kid who was questioning, and I was raised Christian, and I was a believing Christian until, I started reading Ayn Rand. It's an oft-told story in my mid-teens. And then I become a sort of a militant atheist. And then I moved to Boulder and enter the green meme, which I was happy to do. I was happy to leave home, which was Western Pennsylvania, and come out here to the progressive. When we talk about the green meme, we're talking about progressive culture and kissing all the frogs of spirituality that came through Boulder. Yeah. And, I was hanging around a lot of Buddhists. There's a big Buddhist community here, and everybody had their teacher. And I tried to have my teacher, but nobody was lighting me up. And one day I walked into a bookstore and I saw a book on the table. And it said, Up from Eden. And honest to God, Tripp, in that moment, there was a shift in my whole sort of worldview and consciousness.
Just looking at the cover.
Up from Eden. Oh, my goodness. We haven't fallen from Eden. Human beings have risen from the swamps. And there's an upward draft and the whole thing. So I bought the book, and this is by Ken Wilber. And by page 17, I knew I had found my teacher.
That's interesting. Because my background was I was raised in the South, but my family, we weren't part of the church or anything, but I was definitely raised around that kind of like, well, if you're not going to the church, then you're going to hell. There was definitely this.
Right. I was the one saying that to you.
You're the one that's telling me that. Okay. And so I was just like, well, and I always felt this calling to a spiritual life, but I couldn't see the difference between that and religion. And I always felt very conflicted about those ideas and just really struggled with that. And I remember reading an interview with Ken Wilber in some magazine. I remember they said he was drinking a Budweiser, and I was like, who's this guy? Because I drink a few of those. And then he was promoting Marriage of Sense and Soul. I went and picked out Marriage of Sense and Soul. I think I read it in a couple of days, and I finished it at like 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't sleep that night. My brain was putting together all the pieces that if I was going to be spiritual, I had to not be rational. And if I was going to be spiritual, then I had to hate these people or those types. Like all of that stuff just got dismantled. And I remember my brain just spent the entire night putting everything back into place. And it was such an ecstatic feeling of, I get to be a whole person here. I can have access to all of these different things. And it wasn't like, here's the next theology, or here's the next kind of thing for me. It was just, thank you. Here's a system. Here's an operating system to kind of look at the world and make some sense of things. And I was like, it was amazing for me. Suddenly I felt free to explore so many different ideas and so many different, and not feel threatened. Like, well, if I go down this route, then this means I'm in this box. I felt like I had access to all of those different things. Was that similar to you? Yeah.
And it's an oft-told story. Mm-hmm. It's people talk about it being psychoactive because there's a new worldview that arises. I mean, that's actually what the theory is saying. Mm-hmm. It's called integral consciousness, integral theory, because it seeks to integrate really all of the truths of the human story.
Right. Instead of pitting them against one another, it's how do they work together? How do they fit together? Which can sound like a really nasty casserole. It's like you try to throw everything in one dish and it can taste really bad. but
right. It's true. Yeah.
or really bland.
Yes, but it's not like we're homogenizing or blenderizing worldviews. Each one is taken on its own terms. So we're even looking at what is an indigenous worldview. What is it to walk through the woods and not know anything about science? What is it to see the Grand Canyon and not understand erosion? I mean, it just is. So there's that worldview, and we want to see that on its own terms.
Right.
And there's a traditional worldview, which is a sort of a transcendent God in heaven who's running things. That's what I was raised in.
Right.
And we want to actually see that on its own terms and take the beauty of that in without being limited, which is the way it is when it's taught. I mean, you're taught that it's the only way, is what we were talking about earlier. And then there's that modern worldview that arises out of that, which is secular and rational, and it's a whole new world. It's like the Ayn Rand thing, where I'm no longer gripped by these myths, and I'm no longer afraid of hell. And that's a relief. That's a release. But what happens is I tend to, and everyone does, this is how it works, we repress the stage that we're trying to get out of. So I not only want to move beyond my mythic religious thing, I want to vilify it.
Make it bad, make it wrong.
Make it bad and wrong. Yeah. And I do. So I spend my 20s doing that. And then I move into the next worldview, which is the postmodern worldview, where I am, it's about God and country is embarrassing by this point.
For that worldview, yeah. I'm
into a world-centric, I'm a child of the universe, all of this new stuff. And I'm listening to sexual revolution, listening to rock and roll, the whole thing, the whole green culture. And so then I want to marginalize my modern self, my rational self, and say, don't overthink and don't think too hard and all this stuff. And that works for a while. And then the next stage, this is sequential. There's the unfolding of consciousness. That's the theory, is that we enter an integral stage where we start saying, wait a minute, all of those were beautiful. All of those have their gifts. All of those are at war with each other. They're, critiquing each other like crazy, but we actually don't have to do that. As long as we accept what they have to offer without the grip of it being the only way.
Right. And that's hard when our identity is attached to that. Like, this is what defines me. This is what defines my group. And everything else is a threat to that. Then it's hard to see the benefits of the other perspectives, the other worldviews.
It's true. Yeah. And so we see it in the culture. And this is basically the terrain of the culture war. We have the traditionalists, we have the postmodernists, so we have the progressives, we have the traditionalists, the God and country versus the multiculturals. And they're basically trying to pull the modernists. They get half of the modernists. In a two-party system, they have to split that up. So the business people tend to go with conservatives, and the academics tend to go with the liberals. And welcome to the culture wars.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
You host a podcast called The Daily Evolver, and when it comes to evolution, it seems like a slow process, right? We think of bones and fossils, and even technology can seem to take forever if you're waiting on your hoverboard or the next gadget that's coming along. What if evolution is something that we can learn to play with in our own way that we see and understand and experience the world? That's the seed I want to plant today for the person that's listening, is that actually you, the listener, or all of us can start to see how we have evolved as we've grown up, how we're evolving as a culture. But then also that part of evolution is learning how to see these different stages of development and recognize that we're not fixed in any one in particular, but that we have access to different stages in that way. So this idea that evolution could be fun, it could be an active process that we're engaged in the moment. And the reason why I like this is because it gives me peace of mind, that the challenges we're facing in our lives right now are part of a continuum. Like you said, like the state of our politics is not that everything is fucked and everything's going down the drain right now. It's kind of always been that way. It's always been circling the drain. And it's just, our country's going through puberty or whatever stage of development it is, just messy. And this is it.
Yeah.
that helps me. That helps me relax. And it's like, yes, it's difficult, but it's also part of the growth or evolution process. It also helps me just connect with others. I find that I'm less divisive or less rigid when I remember to take this perspective and appreciate that others have their perspective, and it's not about mine versus theirs or theirs versus mine. That kind of rigidity. And it also just helps me feel more connected to what's happening all around as I see that we're all kind of flowing and moving in this growth path. So I wanted to lay that out for the listener. This is something that's always operating. It's how I work with clients. It's how I see their process. It doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, but I thought, why not? Let's talk about it. It was such a big part of my life before, talking about it with you, talking about it with so many others. And so I thought it would be fun to explore that today. And so I guess the first questions that come up is how do we evolve in that way? Like when it comes to recognizing that our development is a mental or emotional process. Is it something that we can be conscious of and lean into and actually operate, or does it have to be one of those things that we grind at and it's
right.
We struggle against?
Well, it's one of the features of integral consciousness is moving into this new view, this new world view, is that you see evolution. You begin to see that this, like the story I told of myself, that was just a natural evolution that I would go from traditional to modern to postmodern to integral, because we're all lit up by the updraft of evolution. That's a thing we actually see. And so we can see that then if we look at humanity and we look at the growth of culture, which is also very similar. And we see that culture is evolving actually quite rapidly. If you think of the way our grandfathers were, or our great-grandfathers were, and then our fathers, and then us, in terms of just, let's just use one of the most basic integrations, masculine and feminine. It used to be very, very rigid in terms of sex roles. And now we have caring men, we have badass women, we have, and it's all, we're actually big enough where we can hold that. And so we actually begin to trust that.
What do you mean trust that we can, that it just becomes more of a norm?
Yeah, I mean, we see it, and we see that, when you talk about getting along with other people, it's one of the first fruits of this kind of thinking, where we just automatically turn criticism into curiosity, is the way I see it. And I still get very critical. I still get very triggered. There are certain things come on the TV. I have to leap for the control, remote and stuff. I'm triggered as much as anybody. But at least there's a second beat now where I say, wait a minute. Instead of how could you say that? It's like, how could you say that? I mean, what's going on with you? How are you seeing things? And actually, the next step is, and what do you have to teach me? I'm just not curious so that I can understand you better, so I can change you to the way I think. I actually want to know what piece of the truth you have that I may be missing or have forgotten.
All right, so I want to press pause here for a second, because this is huge, because typically we're looking to confirm our bias. We're looking to confirm our perspective and our values, and we tend to want to push things away. So what would have us go from critical to curious here? Because that's a leap. I mean, that's crawling out of the mud.
Leap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big leap.
And you know what does it, Tripp? Boredom. Boredom.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
It's boring. I'm tired of it.
Bored of like defending and this is my way.
And reacting and, telling these stories about the other side. And getting with my friends, and we all share our stories, and who boring. Can, at one point it wasn't boring.
Right.
Now it's boring. Yes. And so that's great. Boredom is one of the great engines of evolution, because human beings, we can't stay bored for long.
Yeah.
And so we'll go for anxiety over boredom. I mean, we'll try anything, and so we start getting curious, and then you find out that it's actually quite fruitful, because, other people, I had this idea, I think we all do at some point of our growth, is that other people are a defective version of myself. because it's clear the way the world works. It's clear how things are. And if you don't see that, I mean, if you're my political enemy, for instance, it's because you're either stupid or you're deluded or you've been co-opted or you're just bad.
Right. It's the only way to explain why you would think differently than me.
How else would you think that what you think?
Right.
From an integral perspective, we see that we talk about these worldviews, and there's several of them, but the big three that are online is traditional, modern, postmodern right now. Integral's growing out of postmodern. Mm-hmm. But these are world.
Let me just slow that down because traditional would be more of like I go to church and I believe in God and in God and country, those types of things. Modern is rational. I may not have a God anymore, but right. I live in a very, like, if I can measure it, then it's real. And then postmodern might be more of the progressives. We think of speaking in stereotypes here, but it's kind of like we're all one. Getting into that kind of consciousness. Right? Sensitivity comes online at that point. The psychotherapeutic culture really comes online there. Yep. Those are some of the upsides of it. Yes. And there, again, upsides and downsides of all of these. But worldviews almost understates what they are. They're actually worlds. Yeah. They're worlds that we live in. I mean, and they're different. So somebody at traditional has different receptors. They make meaning differently. They process information differently. They care about different things. One of the things that traditionalists have that modernists and postmodernists have lost is, to the degree that they feel like they are children of Almighty God, they are living in an enchanted world. They have a soul connection to each other and to the history of their country. And they feel that in a soul way that is actually at some point, I grew up with that. Mm. And at some point that became suffocating to me. I wanted to strike out in the world and I wanted to move away and make my way. That's a classic modern move. A lot of people do and a lot of people don't. And that's the other beauty of Integral is that everybody gets to be where they are. Yeah. There's not a pressure of like, you have to change. No. Yeah. No. I'm not trying to change you at all, actually. I just want to unfold you. I want to unpack you. I want to see who you are because you got something for me. And that's sort of that almost like you get into the hero's journey. It's like everybody you meet has a little something for you. Okay. So we're back to being, I'm tired of being bored. I want to, there's something here that I get to learn. So if we come back to your story, leaving that traditional mythic God world, you left a part of yourself too. It meant that you cut part of yourself off. Yes. You were less whole. Yes. And so is that part of the boredom? Because I sense that too. There's times like, gosh, I wish I had access to those things. I envy that ability to take that worldview. I miss that. I would love to have that. Yeah. Well, so at Integral, we get a craving for that. And we want to go back and see what did I have then that I can actually bring forward. It's not throwing out, as Ken says, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We can go find the good parts of each of these worldviews and then take them. Yeah. And mostly they're good except for their exclusivity claim. That's the only thing we have to dismantle, is that their claim that they're the only truth. Okay, so this is the only way. That's the part that kind of drags each one of these down. They all do it. This is the only way to see the world, and that's the part that makes it weak. Yes. So by the time I get rational, I can deconstruct all these myths of religion, and so they're gone. I've done it. I've successfully dismantled my religiosity, and so I move on. But what I realize, and we see this in the modern world, there's an anxiety and there's an emptiness. There's something there's a hole at the center of our soul that actually wants to be seen and loved by life in some way that's transcendental. And we don't actually have to get a new myth around it, although we can sort of get one. I think actually integral theory adds new myths. It says that we've evolved through these stages and there's a precious part of each one of them and we want to have all of them. But at any rate, you're no longer just writing that off as myth and something that's left in the past. And so let's just pause here and see how this helps politically. So if people who are traditionalists and their heart, they're they don't want to buy your story about where
accidents of evolution on the Big Bang floating around on a rock around the fireball. They don't want that. They want to be seen and loved by God because they do feel that way. And you're trying to talk them out of that?
Hell no. They're not going to buy into that.
You get what the problem is. It's not about facts. It's about where you live, where your heart is, where your belly is, where your loins are,
Mm-hmm.
It's big. It's worlds.
Yeah.
So then we get friendlier to these people who we thought were the yahoos.
Right.
And also they have a mythic history of America or their country. Every country has one. And it's, about 53% bullshit. But there's a soul connection to the land and the history that, we get modern, it starts to become a little embarrassing. Postmodern, you think it's evil. You need to have this deconstructed and there's a truth actually to that. It does need to be deconstructed, but it doesn't need to be thrown out.
Doesn't need to be destroyed.
Doesn't need to be destroyed. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we get bored, as we start to recognize that being critical, it's like, wait a second, there's something to reclaim here by learning to listen instead of defending and pushing my perspective. And I don't want to make it like we have to give up our perspective. It's like I can be open to other perspectives and learn from them. And then that makes me stronger, essentially. That has me have a more inclusive or better experience of life altogether instead of I've chosen to live in this world. And even if it's freaking miserable, I'm going to hold fast to it, which is a lot different than, okay, well, if I'm not necessarily completely whole or happy here, what could I learn from these other perspectives? What could I learn from these other worlds? I don't have to do the whole baby with the bathwater goes out. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to, again, we're not trying to homogenize anything. That's the spiritual thing that is actually happening, is that you start looking at perspective, this perspective, that perspective, start letting it in, start getting curious, starting feeling it in. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute. I'm a bigger Jeff. And all of these perspectives are available to me. They're all floating around and they arise miraculously when and as needed. It's a miracle.
Yeah. It can become fascinating from that perspective when we start to recognize like, wow, this is how we unfold. I mean, when we unfold this way as individuals, right, we go through a magical phase, right? And we come, it's just like this. Well, the only way to explain what happens in the television, there's little people inside the television that are doing magical things. It's like, I remember that stage, right? That was how a whole cultures existed for who knows how long.
Most of human history.
Yeah, most of human history was the magical, like this is magical stuff happening.
Yes.
And that's how things happen, right?
Yeah.
That's how we explain everything. And then we move through this process. And I think it's just helpful to recognize, okay, given my worldview, like given how I think things actually are, and I'm really invested in that. What if it's only a stage? What if it's just a mile in the road of what is unfolding? And maybe that would help us start to relax some of these things. And that, like a ladder, I think we've used that before. The ladder is like, why would we curse the previous steps? They helped us get to where we are. We can't just knock them out after we go up. They played a role. They played a really important role.
Yeah. And they need to continue to play a role in a new integrated us,
right?
In a newly integrated culture. And I think that we're going to see that. I think we are seeing that, despite the Sturm und Drang of politics day to day and the Trump show, the ongoing Trump show. I think where we're going and where we are actually find ourselves, if we look, is an integration of a lot of the same principles of conservatism, liberalism. There's a new kind of integration, particularly with young people who are talk about bored. The bored of the boomer, the whole argument between the left and right is bored. Anybody under 30s has to be bored to tears. If you're not, I would advise you to rethink.
I'm exhausted by it.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
But that's the good news in a way. Once you see that evolution is happening, I can see it I can feel it in my own life. And then we can see it in the culture. And it's not pretty. It's often, we often say evolution is beautiful, but not pretty.
Yeah.
And you can see that in nature. It's not pretty the way we have created all this beauty, but there you go. That's apparently how God set it up.
All right. So let's see if we can help the listener. The holidays are coming up.
Okay.
Right. We're gonna be sitting down around the table. Might be sitting with some different worldviews, some different worlds.
Yeah.
So what could we give the listener here as an exercise as he's sitting there and he's noticing either his boredom or the blood pressure starting to rise as things are discussed around the table? How might he start to be able, or he or she be able to play with these perspectives and start to access another way of seeing what's happening there at the dinner table?
Yeah. Well, fair enough.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, don't expect too much. We can only go as far and as fast as we can. And like I said, I get triggered all the time with shit. But just be more curious. I mean, I think you ask questions, you really listen. You know, when Uncle Bert is talking about whatever, and you let it in and see it from his perspective, and again, what can you actually, so much of the time when we ask questions and we listen, our goal is so that we can understand this person better so that we can influence them. Nope.
I want to draw them in, and then I'm going to find a weakness in their argument, and then I'm going to get them. Yeah.
And they know it. We all know it. So that's a game we do, but we're not doing that game. We're doing the game that we're getting curious about those people so that we can be influenced by them.
Ooh, that's a big ask for some folks, I can imagine.
Yeah. I want to come out of Thanksgiving dinner a bigger person than I went in when I went in. I'm not going to worry about what they got.
So first I got to let go that I need to be right.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Ooh, I got to let go that I need to be right. They need to be wrong. They need to be proven differently. They need to change. Okay, that's a huge commitment right off the bat. Like, what would it be like? That's actually creates a lot of spaciousness when I don't need to be right and I don't need to prove you wrong anymore. I might actually start to have a lot more fun.
Totally. What a relief. I mean, I can feel it in this moment.
Yeah. Okay. So if I could step into that perspective, then I could imagine being genuinely curious. I could imagine actually starting to really enjoy my interaction with somebody. And then it would be like, yeah, what would have me believe that? What would have me believe the things that this person would say, instead of assuming this person has a brain injury or they felt, like whatever, whatever the other excuses are. It's just like, what if this person's really actually pretty smart? And what would have them believe that, what would have them say these things other than the blanket, they're racist, they're this, they're that kind of stuff. Okay.
Exactly.
And then to take it a step further is like, is there even one tiny bit here that would influence me in a positive way? Like, what could I take away? Is there something that would help me here? Doesn't mean I have to give up what I believe.
Right.
But could it add to it?
Yes. Yeah. Integral is about adding, not choosing. That's been a new sort of watchword for me, is that I want to hear what you have to say so that I can add whatever you have to my repertoire. And even you use racist. So that's a very loaded term, and it's got a lot of incendiary sort of qualities to it. And so somebody, you go back home and you're listening to somebody who's saying things that you see are racist. I mean, if you're in the liberal, progressive, postmodern, or even modern worldview, you got to sort of stop that. And I think at some point you probably do. But again, it's the exclusivity claims that you want to just deconstruct and get rid of. So
what's another way to say that? This is the only way to think it.
So that this person is saying that being white is the best way to be.
As they say this through their hood. Okay.
Or whatever, so the implications. I mean, we all have a lot of triggers around that sort of thing. So, that's fucked up. But what's actually the positive part of that has them in its grip, in even in a good way, is that they want to have a soul connection with people. They want to have a soul connection with their people. Okay?
So this is what's going on for them, is that they would choose to believe that about other races, but what's really underneath that is they just want to feel more connected to the people that they identify with.
Yes. And so you don't have to worry about that last part of that statement about the people I identify with. I actually want to feel a soul connection with everybody. So that's what I got from that conversation, is that I want to feel that where I want to know who my people are, actually. But it doesn't have, at a higher stage, it doesn't have anything to do with race or anything. It just has to do with, because we're all human beings, and how fabulous is that?
Right.
But a typical kind of modern postmodernist, they're still telling a story that they think is the only one that's true.
Right. And even then, it's just like how you cannot give anybody an inch if they have a flawed perspective like that. They are, terrible,
bad, wrong, must be stopped. The whole cascade of
kill them, right?
Kill them,
and they actually don't see the lack of intolerance on that.
Right.
That's a whole other conversation. But so what I'm getting is that we can see the flaw in their reasoning, but we can understand what's really driving it, which is their deep desire to be connected with others. It's human.
I don't want it to be where a myth that excluding other people and demonizing other people. I'll drop that part, but I want the part that has me feeling like I belong, and that there's something that is bigger than me that I have to be obedient to and faithful to, and I'm not going to let that go.
I'm part of something bigger. This is where I belong. I'm loved here. I belong here. Oh yeah, I want that too. That's somewhere where we connect. We have different ideas about how to go about that, but I can connect with this person on that deeper desire.
Yes.
Instead of demonizing them.
Yes.
For the way that they want to go about that. But I could see that that's something we mutually have in common. Yeah.
Yeah. To the degree that you can do that, and this other, that people can't resist that sort of thing. If people feel seen, like you really saw them and that they actually influenced you, they're just a puddle. They can't help themselves. And so that's all of a sudden we have built what we just talked about. We have actually a little bit of a soul connection with that person because they influenced us. Isn't that something?
When we chose not to demonize them and get wrapped up on kind of the how or the process that when we got in touch with what it is their deep desire is, well, wait, we're actually human here.
Yeah.
They have a harder time now demonizing you because you've been human with them. And now it starts to screw with, they're like, wait a second, maybe all people that aren't like me aren't so bad. Exactly. It starts to soften all of that. It starts to humanize everybody.
Yeah.
It's a little harder to be so hateful and so exclusive when you realize, well, I can connect with that person. He's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a lot different than I'm going to impose my way of being on top of you and trying to convince you with facts and figures and shame and all of that kind of stuff.
Argue with you and all of that horse shit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and listen to this, even though I love all this, but it's such a Aikido. It's such a soft yin way of doing these things that
and you end up bigger and better for it. I mean, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. And this person's flawed, and can I still find a way to love them and appreciate them?
Yes. And of course you might fight them politically. You're going to fight whatever, but you don't have to, the hatred gets dismantled. The separation gets breached and we connect.
And I want to be really clear, because this doesn't mean that we then condone the terrible behaviors, right?
No.
But we can start to see this person and what's driving them. We can also stop their behaviors. If they were to do something hateful or try to be hurtful for somebody else, we'd obviously be forceful to stop that behavior. But separating this behavior from, I get why this person would believe this and do this. I can understand that. I would want that too. How they're going about it, though, that's what we want to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I love this. This is a great place to kind of wrap up. This is exactly what I was looking for. Is a little back
pocket integral practice.
Well, that's it. I mean, I studied integral for so long. And I remember I'd sit down with my grandmother and she'd be going through a problem. I was like, I had a hard time being like, well, how would integral help her? And I just really couldn't find that. This type of tool is wonderful for that. So if you're interested in checking out Jeff's podcast, check out the Daily Evolver. I'm sure it's anywhere and everywhere that podcasts are.
Yep. DailyEvolver.com, Daily Evolver everywhere.
All right, my man. Jeff, great to talk to you again.
Tripp, what a pleasure. Thanks so much.
If these interviews are helping you, then please visit The New Man on iTunes and leave us a positive review so others can discover the show more easily. Thanks for listening.